Police abuse remains one of the most serious and divisive human rights violations in the United States today. The horrific images of Rodney King being beat by the LAPD and the execution of Oscar Grant by the BART police are some of the most blatant reminders of police brutality against innocent victims. The excessive use of force by police officers, including unjustified shootings, severe beatings, and fatal chokings, persist because overwhelming barriers to accountability make it possible for officers who commit human rights violations to escape due punishment and often to repeat their offenses. Police and public officials greet each new report of brutality with denials or explain that the act was just an aberration, while the administrative and criminal systems that should deter these abuses by holding officers accountable instead virtually grant them impunity. This special insider-exclusive investigation discovered that police brutality is persistent and rampant across America, and that systems to deal with abuse have failed, and that victims seeking redress face daunting obstacles at every point in the process, ranging from overt intimidation to the reluctance of local and federal prosecutors to take on brutality cases of officers who have committed these human rights violations. Despite claims to the contrary from city officials where abuses have become scandals in the media, efforts to make meaningful reforms have fallen short. The barriers to accountability are remarkably similar from city to city. Shortcomings in recruitment, training, and management are common to all. So is the fact that officers who repeatedly commit human rights violations tend to be a small minority who taint entire police departments but are protected routinely by the silence of their fellow officers and by flawed systems of reporting, oversight, and accountability. Today, the Insider exclusive TV series examines this epidemic. In this new exclusive TV special, Justice in America, Elena Mondragon's story, with famed civil rights lawyers John Burris and Adante Pointer, on location in Oakland, California, and how they won a historic $21 million verdict for the wrongful death of Elena Mondragon, who was shot and killed by the Fremont, California police. This is the Insider Exclusive, live from Oakland, California. It is my great pleasure to introduce John Burris and Adante Pointer to the show. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Tell us a little bit about your firm, John.
Oh, yes, my firm, Burris, Nessenbaum, Curry, and Lacey, is an outgrowth of a firm that I've had for many, many years called Law Offices of John Burris. And in this particular firm that I'm now involved primarily in police litigation, some employment, but you name the gamut of police issues that come up, whether it's sex officers or police shootings, tasers, jail suicide, jail beatings, the whole gamut of police misconduct we're involved in. I also look to see if there's any efforts of reform that I can do, and I've been involved in a major case for a number of years on reform, trying to reform the Oakland Police Department. I'm not so certain it's going to ultimately work, but we certainly have been there with an independent monitor and a federal monitor working for us. So that's really my the scope of the practice that I'm involved in.
Right, and we've done a show on the Riders case, which has been going on for, what, 20 years?
20 years, right. I filed that case in 2000.
Yeah, what I like about that is actually there are lawyers in this world that not only that want to work with police departments to make them better. How do we make them better? Adante, your practice or your firm, what is the name of your firm, by the way?
Sure. The name of my firm is Pointer and Buolna, otherwise known as Lawyers for the People. And we specialize in police misconduct cases, a full range of those type of cases, but we also take on cases that deal with personal injury, catastrophic injury, employment discrimination, and also school issues. There's a lot of issues that deal with the community, and the community needs advocacy. We're here to help.
Now, we are here today on a really sad and tragic case. It was a case of a young girl, 16 years old, she was pregnant at the time, who was more or less executed by the Fremont Police Department. Her name was Elena Mondragon. Tell our audience a little bit about the case, John.
Well, and this is a case that really sad and tragic, where Abby was 16 years old at the time, was in the car with a guy named Tiger. They had been sort of surveilled, if you will, by the Fremont Police Department, not for the girl, but for Tiger.
And he had a warrant for his arrest.
He had a warrant for his arrest. Tiger had been involved in a lot of mischievous conduct that we know of, but she had not been involved in that, and she was a passenger in the car, when the fact is the police come up on them, they blocked him in. As Tiger was trying to get away, drive through, the officers, 3 officers shot into the car, one from the side of the front, another from the side itself, and one from the back, basically hitting her and killing her. No one else was killed in the car, but it was a tragic, tragic incident because it could have been avoided. It did not have to happen this way. Clearly, these officers had made a plan. That plan was botched in terms of how to do it, but they carried forward anyway, and in that process, they killed an innocent person. So we filed a civil rights lawsuit a number of years ago on her behalf, and ultimately that matter went to trial very recently.
What are some of the problems that you saw in this case? Like, for example, we all know, aren't the police officers, if they have lapel cameras, they're supposed to be on when they're on duty, right? These cameras were not on. What was the excuse for that? None of the cameras. How many officers were involved?
Not one camera was off. And
what was the explanation for that?
The fact that they didn't have these cameras on, none of these officers, when confronted with this at trial, it was almost the dog ate my homework excuse. I didn't know how to turn it on. Things happened too quick for me to turn it on. Oh, I thought the batteries were working, but they weren't. I left it at home. I mean, these officers developed any type of excuse.
Let me ask you this question. Let's talk about the operation of these cameras. When I put my uniform on, if I'm a cop and I go outside and I have one of these cameras on my lapel camera, right? Aren't I supposed to have it on at all times, or only when I get out of the car?
Yeah, I've been involved in cases like this, and when the principal issue is, were there standards, operating procedures as to when that camera is supposed to be turned on? Obviously, if there's a major event taking place, it's supposed to be turned on immediately when you get out of the car. The problem that you have, in some cases, it's not turned on. And it's not turned on, Dante talked about a lot of the different reasons that happened in this case, but it's pretty typical that if you don't really want to know precisely everything that's happened, you don't turn the camera on immediately. But it is a requirement that they're supposed to be turned on immediately. The real question is, are there disciplinary rules in place so that if you don't turn it on, you in fact can be punished? Here in Oakland, you get 1 chance, maybe 2 chances that's not happened, and you can be terminated as a consequence of it. So the camera is, the body-worn cameras is the single most important process that has taken place since Rodney King to evaluate police officer conduct, because it's done in contemporary time. And there's nothing better than being able to see it when it happens, because memories fade, they have interests, people have biases about various things, but the camera tells the story. Now, the police will let you say, it's not the whole story, and they'll say it wasn't turned on soon enough. But if it's turned on soon enough and it's used properly, it in fact will tell the story. But so it's important.
So let me ask you, how are these cameras turned on? You got them on your shirt, you got them on your jacket, whatever. How are they turned on?
Very simply, you just press a button. So yeah, officers are trained to do multiple things, just like we all know how to walk and chew bubble gum at the same time. Right. They're trained to have muscle memory to turn these cameras on. So when they make from our position, a conscious decision not to turn these cameras on, that's because they know they're about to do something that they're not supposed to do.
Or if the camera is on, and they see something they don't want to see, that is an officer beating up on a person, then accidentally that camera will get turned off. Or if they're placed in another position where they're looking at something and they don't like what they see necessarily, they will in fact turn it on. Or they just don't turn it on initially. So the best thing you can do here is to hold officers accountable and instruct a jury. The jury can then see that you had a camera, it should have been turned on, you didn't turn it on, that can be used against you in a case.
I think it was pretty powerful. I mean, evidence to show that it wasn't just one officer that didn't have his camera, all 5 of them.
Out of the entire task force, not one officer had good thought to turn that camera on.
Now you're faced with a problem that they say that Tiger, the driver, the guy, the fugitive, right? He drove his car towards them and they were defending themselves in self-defense. How did you dispute that? There's no camera. What do you do?
Well, those are always, that that poses a big challenge for us in these civil rights cases dealing with the police. When the only witnesses around are the officers, then it's a one-sided story. But fortunately, as we just discussed, when you have the physical evidence, memory doesn't fade, it doesn't have a bias, and frankly, it's there to tell the story. And we use the physical evidence to prove up what happened, which were these officers fired at this car while it was driving away, when it was not a threat, as they claim.
Under the law, all police training, officers are supposed not to shoot into a moving car. They're supposed to get out of the way, obviously, when it's practical to do so. Here, the officer tried to suggest it wasn't practical for him to do so, but there were shots from the back and from the side and from the corner. If he had, all that would indicate that the car was moving away from them and their lives personally were not in danger at the time they shot into it. It's a very significant point, and I think the jurors saw that and heard that.
Didn't they think about this? I mean, if the officers are firing from the side, from the back, that car couldn't have been aimed for them, right?
That's what we understood and what we were able to communicate, and clearly the jury believed, which has resulted in a $21 million verdict. Right. The officers sold that story to the public, to their department, and to the district attorney's office. They bought it up, and those officers walked free, despite having blood on their hands from a 16.
The only one of the shootings that arguably could have been used, and that was the officer who was in front of the car, who was off to the side. Because when he shoots into the car, he shoots at an angle, which clearly suggests that he was not in front of the car, but arguably he could have been close to being in the front of the car at the time he shot, which means he didn't have to do it. And that's the point, though. That was the major excuse that was taking place, that his life was the one that was in danger, and the other shootings were taking place by the other officers in order to cover it for him.
Now, when the jury is presented with this evidence, right, what do the officers say? What was their response to this? I mean, they have attorneys that represent them. What are the attorneys saying?
Well, they tried to throw everything at the wall defense. Yeah. They said, look, we were under a lot of stress. This was a bad guy. Ebby is 16 years old. She's hanging out with bad people. And you shouldn't necessarily care about this because our lives are in danger. We were forced to do this. When in actuality, they didn't have to do this. Their lives were not in danger when they fired those AR-15s into that car. That 16-year-old girl was innocent. She didn't deserve to be shot and killed on that day. And so this was a botched surveillance operation where they had every opportunity to avoid going forward, and instead they engaged in cowboy activity, which resulted in a 16-year-old girl losing her life.
This is a classic example of blaming the victims, but they're basically saying that they caused their own demise, or caused her demise by Tiger driving the car in which she did. That really was a cover. And that's one of the simple issues that we have to deal with in most cases, is the police covering themselves in some kind of glory, and that they themselves know all the answers. And we should not, as a community, question them. And that's the big issue that they have here, is questioning them. And this was done in a situation where there was no cameras, but the facts on the ground, the evidence, the bullets, and everything that they found circumstantially proved that what they said happened did not happen.
Right. You had a PowerPoint on this. You were actually showing the diagrams of how the bullets are being fired, correct? And that's very convincing and powerful to the jury, isn't it?
It was. It was. That carried the day here. We hired an expert to come in and look at where the bullet casings were at in order to locate where the shootings took place and trajectories and where people were on the crime scene. And so from that, we're able to piece this together just like a puzzle.
Yeah. These officers did not lose their jobs. As we talked about earlier in the show, there was a $21 million verdict. They paid no money at all, personally, correct?
Absolutely.
And the internal investigation cleared them, right? They were doing the right thing. How can that be?
Because that's how it's done. Police cover for police. Internal Affairs has a very weak record as it comes to holding police officers accountable. Not only was it true in Fremont, but it's true nationally. It's one of the real issues that we have to deal with. Who polices the police? And it cannot expect the Internal Affairs Department to, in fact, be the unity that polices the police. So what happened here is not uncommon. It happens in most cases. Police officers are exonerated by Internal Affairs. They're exonerated by the city attorney. They're exonerated by the district attorney's office. And the only group out there that can handle holding them accountable is us. Our firms and our activities are the ones that have been holding police officers accountable for well over 30 years now. Fortunately, the issue is that the police themselves are not policed by an independent body. The police, policed, if you will, by the Internal Affairs Section, which always supports the police for the most part. So the question is, how do you get this done? But when you look at it, we know that the Internal Affairs doesn't police the police. We know the police don't police themselves. We know the city attorney doesn't do it. And of course, the district attorney doesn't do it. The district attorney and frankly, the United States attorney as well. All of them have the ability to interject themselves into here and evaluate that evidence and hold these officers accountable. But not one of them did. Not one of them took the positions they were wrong, even after the case was over. Even after the case was over. They did not take a position that the officer had did something wrong. It's always the lawyer's fault, and it's a weak jury. That's the argument that happens at the end. When the fact is they never take a look at themselves to see what they really, in fact, did wrong.
Now, we did a show before on Oakland, right? And you mentioned that one of the changes that have been done with the Oakland Police Department is if, for example, the camera, right? If you do that twice, once or twice, you're out, you're fired, correct? This is Fremont Police, correct? They're a little bit south of San Francisco. What kind of changes have happened there at the Fremont Police Department?
I'm not aware of any changes that have taken place there. They've got a new police chief. I think the police, one of the major people involved in the case died recently. But there hasn't been any philosophical changes in terms of training, training that officers engage in. Now, the training itself is not necessarily bad wherever it is. I mean, police officers are well trained. I mean, they have post training, and so the training isn't the issue. The training is the issue is application of the training. Do you follow the training? Not too much that you're not trained. Like, everyone knows you're not supposed to shoot in the car. They've been trained that way. Everyone's been trained that you're supposed to give a warning before you shoot somebody. You're supposed to let them know. But they don't do that. That's not a function of the training. That's a function of the officers themselves not following the rules that they've been trained by.
Did you find it a little unusual that they were armed with AR-15s?
You know, they were armed as if this was some type of military raid, when they were really dealing with teenagers. And they had no information that they were armed. They were swimming and in their swimming outfits. These were just young kids that were out and about. The police were surveilling them as if they were going to take down some type of terrorist group.
And he had, I think Tiger had a bench warrant out for his arrest, right?
He had a warrant out for his arrest. He was known to flee from the police. He was known to have engaged in some robberies. But he was the only person. He was the focus. But the officers treated this as guilt by association. And because of that, a 16-year-old girl lost her life. Despite the loss of her life, despite a historic $21 million verdict, it's still business as usual for the city of Fremont.
Let's talk about who pays that $21 million.
Taxpayers and insurance companies.
And I think, are you able to say that to the jury? Are you able to say, I mean, but they know that. They know it, right?
Most people know it, but it is a rule that you do not talk about where the money comes from. We can't testify as the city's going to pay it, as the officer going to pay it.
We're taxpayers.
Taxpayers would pay because the city is obligated to pay. It's not like that the officers are obligated. Only if the punitive damages have been awarded in a case will the individual have to pay, and the city does not pay. And even in those cases where where punitive damages have been awarded, the officers have not traditionally paid. The city will pay it because the police union that they're protecting the officers will insist that the city pays it. So, as they say, the police have no skin in the game when it comes to money. They get they get lawyers paid by the city, substantially good lawyers, and when the judgment comes in, the city pays the judgment, both punitive damage as well as compensatory damages, or general damages.
Both of you have been involved with these cases. I mean, it is kind of your bread and butter, you know, over the years. How do we make things better? How do we make the police more responsible? How will the community feel more comfortable when they're stopped by a police officer?
Well, I'll tell you, stopped by the police officer is a major deal. To me, that's one of the hallmarks of why I've been involved in this case, is on the racial profiling question. That's a huge issue for me. And that is, but that also is one, it's not only just training, it's actually an attitude, it's a question of accountability. Are you holding these officers accountable for this conduct? But you need data to see if there really is a policy or practice in place. In the case that I'm involved in, the Oakland case, one of the things we did a long time ago was start gathering data. And as a consequence of gathering that data, we know who gets stopped, why they get stopped, what's their ethnic background in stopped. I think you need to have a case, and you have to make the case substantial enough where you can look at some of these systemic issues that exist within a department. A lot of work has been done in the years that we've been involved here, where this new legislation is out there. California's done a wonderful job in passing new bills that allows for us to get more access to the information. The one that they passed that I think that's a big fight right now, and that is on the changing on when the use of force, where deadly force is used. And the standard law has always been it's been under a principle called objective reasonable. But now the state legislature added another component. Not only must it be reasonable, it has to be necessary. And that is the point that the police department has protested all around the state, even though it is passed by the legislature and they've been told they have to do it. But we found out that some cities are unwilling to hold officers accountable under the principle of reasonable and necessary. So, but I do think that there's work that can be done around the state legislature we've done, and some cities have taken responsibilities for their act. These are the kind of things we look at all the time. How do we make a change come about? As I say, make the case bigger than the case itself, and that is looking at the various components where reform can occur.
In order to, address this issue, an issue that's longstanding and has been really just now coming to the forefront, if you will, because of the advent of cell phones, videos, as well as officer body cameras. But there's two principles: transparency and personal accountability. Transparency with making the data available, making the body cams available to the public so that we can evaluate what officers are doing in our name, and then personally holding them accountable.
Yeah, let me stop you on that one, okay? Because I have seen, or I have heard from police departments, well, we don't want to release this right now because it could be misinterpreted. You've heard that too, right? So, I mean, it's not going to be edited. What do they want to do? Edit it or what?
Well, they do edit them.
They're heavily edited.
But I want to ask another very important question, because I remember we did the Oscar Grant story, okay? And I remember a cop turning to the young kids who were videotaping this with their cell phones, right? He said, "Give me your cell phone. That's evidence." Do you have to do that?
You don't have to turn over that evidence just because they say, "Give it to me."
Yeah.
Because it's your personal property. And in fact, what we see happen is witnesses turn over the cell phone, and then voila, that stuff disappears. Sure. Or the tape is edited or is deleted. So that's very important, critical evidence, and that's why the police want it, which is also why they don't want to release it to the public. Because when we can actually see what took place, we can stand in judgment to decide whether or not that officer is acting in line with the law and in the way we expect our police officers to behave.
They do have a legitimate argument to make, for example, on the release of cell phone data or police documents at the very beginning, and because the case is under investigation. You just don't know, and there's something to be said that you give that information out, it could affect the investigation. But that's only for a certain period of time. And I think we've gone to the point where it's 30 days, or it's 45 days where they have to release it. I think it should be shorter than that, but there's something to be said for something that's obviously ongoing investigation that is not released immediately. But access to it should occur as soon as possible. And even if not, they should let the lawyers see it, who are representing the family of some deceased person. They should let that person see it, or whoever they are, at the earliest possible convenience. That doesn't have to be left. But I do get the point that there's some issue about turning it over to the public right away.
Yeah, there in the George Floyd case, there was a young lady who now has, I think, a full scholarship at some school. Who videotaped that whole thing. And I believe that she put it on YouTube right away. Is that illegal?
It's not illegal. It's happened in a public space. She's more than welcome to record it and then publicize it. And that's why the transparency is so important. So when police officers push back against, well, we don't want to release the video, I call it hogwash. Yeah. Because we see every night on the news, if you're a criminal suspect and you're not a police officer, that video gets released the same day to the news and to the public, and you're smeared or you're accused of being a criminal suspect or doing something wrong. You can't have a two-tier system of justice.
Let me ask you this. I grew up in a time, same as you, when cops were kind of almost your friends. You knew them. The local beat kind of. I grew up in a small town. It had 500 people in it, so everybody knew the cops. But what I found many, many years ago is they knew how to de-escalate situations rather than pulling out a weapon and shooting somebody. I don't see that happening today.
And I don't think it's ever been that way in urban places. LAPD, clearly not. where there's minority communities are in place in any significant number, there's no officer-friendly situation involved.
Why do you think that's so?
One, there's a reputation of the department. That's a hard thing to break. I mean, Oakland had this serious reputation. LA had this serious reputation about controlling the streets. And so that's been hard to undermine. Now, and certainly we are doing that in certain places, but officers come from places where they bring their own biases. And many of these officers come from towns that they've been, with a lot of racial prejudice has taken place amongst them, quietly, talking amongst themselves, that biasness that they have, they bring that to the department. And basically, when they see people commit crimes, they think that they should be punished in certain ways. They themselves will issue their own street punishment, once they have to do. But I have not, when I grew up in town, Vallejo, there was no officer-friendly situation that I can remember. And certainly, since I was in Chicago, there's no officer-friendly. These are serious cops on the street who are there to control you and to keep you on the reservation. Why? Because they don't want you involved in general middle-class white people's neighborhoods or upper middle class. So they have to keep you on the reservation, and they punish you when you try to get off. And the way they do that is they put a fear in you. You know, like we had a case, you know, where the strip search case is the case I'm most pained by. Young black men were being stopped, they were being searched, but then they had the private part searched in their process. And there was no drugs found. We got a law that the judge declared to be unconstitutional. But the most important thing to me was that concept was to embarrass and humiliate the people on the street, but also to put a fear in them. You know, the fear is this is what can happen to you. And so there's a lot of that kind of activity that takes place. We talk about de-escalation all the time now. That's a huge issue. And that's actually true. There's real benefit from that because we see what happens when mentally impaired people are shot and killed by the police. If they had de-escalated, if they try to calm the situation down, you wouldn't have had that shooting that's necessary. A lot of these shootings that take place are unnecessary if the officer used de-escalation techniques, calm the situation down, provided some space for them. We would not have the shootings of people as we've had.
Officers are trained to de-escalate a situation. They have the tools. The question is, are they going to use them? And when they decide not to, are they going to be held accountable for that? And so, yeah, officers are trained to supposedly stop the threat. To me, this is just all cute language to excuse away bad conduct. Cute language that the district attorneys accept, they don't challenge. The internal affairs officers investigations don't hold them and discipline them as police officers, and they get away scot-free again and again and again.
Well, you've worked with the Oakland Police Department many years. Do you see their training change?
Oh, yes, changed a lot.
In other words, are they not telling people to not shoot center mass?
Well, that part they have not trained. That's a different question. The issue that we've had a lot of success on is on the use of force, obviously. We had a lot of force in terms of racial profiling, stopping people, etc., consistency of discipline, those kind of issues. So we've been around the question, but on the training issue of stopping someone, shoot center mass, there has not been any discussion about that issue. No, I don't think we can take much ground on it because area that goes to the question of police officer safety, they're not going to give an inch on those kind of things. And shooting, there's an issue about should you have used the gun in the first place? That's the more important question. If you're not supposed to use it, then wherever you shot is not appropriate. But if you had to shoot, then you have a right to use center mass, as that's the training is. That's not a fight that I'm really interested in having because there are many other fights, and that's one that you can't have a fight, in my view, when you're saying police cannot defend themselves in face of deadly force.
One last question to both of you. You have a lot of people contact you. You've got a lot of big cases that you've won. How do you determine in these police cases which cases to take? You first, Daunting.
We look at the facts first. We start there. What are the facts? Can we prove what took place? And there's also a social component to all of those cases. What is the underlying issue here? Just because we may not have, like in the Mondragon case, video, but there's a 16-year-old girl that's dead that should not be. We could still take those cases. So there's a lot of different criteria. There's not a set standard, but there has to be humanity a part of that factors into this equation. If you will, our algorithm is set on justice, not on big verdicts, not on settlements, but on pushing the social agenda forward.
How about you, John?
To me, did a wrong occur? If the wrong occurred, then I got to see whether I can prove it in some way. But I take big cases, I take little cases, 'cause I'm interested in knowing if you got beat up or something hurt by the police, I want to do something about that. I don't care how young you are or how old you are. If I can do something about it, I will. And so I have a very simple process here. It's not sophisticated. It's about, was that person injured? And did the police have a right to do with them that they did? If they did not, then I'm your guy. People like me are your guys. That's the way I've always been. And it's very important to me that we cover the whole range of people who are killed or injured by the police, whatever capacity and wherever it is. So for me, was there wrong that was committed, and can I make it right, at least by some modification? It doesn't have to be the biggest dollars in the place. It could be small dollars. But to me, it's the representation for people who cannot help themselves. That's my view of how things go.
Well, thank God for both of you. Thank God for fighting for people that need someone to fight for them. And thank you for being on the show. It was a privilege.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Yes.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.